Let's resume. There we go. There I am saying I'm really looking forward to watching some of the other recordings, and I haven't started my own. So yes, hopefully you've got a lot out of this particular week, and it's just really lovely. I love Small Charities Week because it's a load of people coming together, sharing ideas, sharing information. Okay. Oops. So I'm going to talk a little bit about financial planning and stability for small charities and kind of what that actually means. A lot of the time when I do, or any kind of financy type person does this sort of talk, you get a lot of people coming in and they want, they kind of want actions. They say, can you just give me some practical things that I can do? And so I think the practical thing you can do is change your mindset, but that doesn't always go down very well, because a lot of the time people go, well, what I want is to have a list of things that I can put in my to-do list, and I can tick them off, and then I'm done, and I've covered finance, and I can move on to the next thing, especially in small charities, in my ever-expanding list of things to do. Problem is, if I give you that, if I say, oh, you do this one practical thing, one, it's probably a lie, because I'm pulling something out of nothing and saying, this one particular, anyone who's selling you this idea that you can just, there's a secret formula is selling you something. And there's every charity, every organization has different ways of working, different ways of doing things. So one, it would be kind of wrong, and the two, we see it again and again, especially in when part of my actual day job is going into charities where things have gone wrong and trying to help fix them. And one of the things you see where it's gone wrong is people have gone, right, well, I do my budget. That's the one bit of finance I have to do. So I've done my budget, and then they've not looked at it. They've ignored it for the rest of the year. And then they come back at the end of the year and they're like, why doesn't my actuals meet my budget? What the hell is going on? Why are we running out of money? And that's one of the problems with that idea of, oh, well, I can just put this one thing into my to-do list and that's it. And actually, what I think we need to start doing is bringing financial thinking and financial planning and stability into your entire kind of mode of operations, your entire way of thinking about charity. So when we were looking at Small Charities Week, a bunch of other finance people, Liz, who is here as well, is included in this. We were talking about what we wanted to try and do some kind of thing together for Small Charities Week as a finance collective. We're a bunch of people who all work in different capacities, but as freelancers for sort of small and medium charities. And we're throwing around ideas about what we could focus, how we could frame some support that we would give. In the end, we didn't manage to produce anything, although all of us have ended up doing something for Small Charities Week separately. So one of the ideas we bounced around and we came up with is this idea of the sort of accidental CFO. CFO is a chief financial officer. And what we were talking about, what we wanted to aim our thing at is, we know that there are a bunch of people, either it's the CEO who does everything and therefore CFO, FD, like financial director, it just becomes part of their organizational role. Or, I found myself working quite a lot recently with people who are, they're a resources manager, or they're a director of, some of the slightly larger charities. They're where you've got an SLT rather than one person, but they're the resource manager, or they're a people and finance and people manager. They're someone who is good at administration, good at that kind of like resource management, getting things in the right place at the right time. And they're told, well, you're doing finance now. And these people, then they're often not formally trained in financial, they're not accountants, they're not bookkeepers even. They often feel that they're not fully equipped to do it. So in the worst cases, what happens is finance then goes off the radar for them. They go, well, I've got all the other stuff that I know how to do, and I don't know how to do finance. And actually, what I kind of want to have a little bit of time here to say is these people, yes, you might need help, which involves, checking in with some of, with your accountants or with, getting some support or whatever. But ultimately, as long as you're thinking about it and forefronting it in your mind and actually turning it into part of your working practice, you can do it. And I mean, small charity just feels so much like, in so many ways, as a place where you go, yeah, oh, I've got this thing that I have to do. I have no idea how to do it. Right, let's work it out. So if you can bring that mindset, like you don't end up in this sector, in this part of the sector, if you don't like solving puzzles, if you don't like solving kind of intractable problems by working out, by piecing it together, by working out, by checking in with other people. It's not a sector for someone who wants to go to work, be told what to do for 8 hours and then go home. So my kind of mindset is to say, you can bring that to finance, even if you're scared of numbers, even if you're a little bit worried about it, you can bring it into you can bring the finance into that mindset, and you can start using that to, just to get yourself into the right place, so that the issues that we see with, running out of money or cash flow issues or those sorts of things, they're not difficult issues to deal with if you have been thinking about them in advance. They're difficult issues to deal with if they come out of nowhere. And so, yeah, I mean, I'd love to be able to go, I could probably talk for hours about all of the different things you could do, but I think that the takeaway from this point is literally, you can do it. You just have to embrace it as part of all of the other things that you're embracing in your role as CEO who does everything, or person who has just had, how on earth do we run an event? You weren't an events planner before this, but now you are. You weren't a CFO before this, you can be. So yeah, embrace it, build it into your workflow, delegate where appropriate, but maintain that kind of oversight. So, and this comes from a conversation I was having with a small charity leader last week, actually. And we had this, it was this kind of quick call that was like, is there anything I can do? Is there whatever? And it turned out she had all the skills and stuff within her team. She was just kind of going, oh, well, I have to take this on myself because I'm the CEO. And it was like, you know what? This person actually did have a resources manager who was chomping at the bit to go and do stuff. And I was like, give her this job. You've got responsibility for it, but give her the job and just keep oversight. And now suddenly it goes, this big thing that was sitting on your to-do list is now not on your to-do list. It's just an oversight thing. So you can go on to the next thing that you want to do. and your staff member who really wants to know what she, really wants to get involved, has a thing that she can do. It's finding what's within your space, and it doesn't work with super small charities where you are the only member of staff, but you have to maintain that responsibility and oversight, but you can delegate things down and you can work out how it's going. That's a nice bit of actual concrete advice. So how do we get to sort of intentional financial planning? So I talked a little bit just now about the fact that we need to do it. So what are we doing? And the key for me here is think about what you have, not what you want to have. And that includes what you have can include prospects. It's not about saying, oh, well, I've only got this money in the bank now, therefore that's all I can use. You need to bring in, if you know that your organization is going to be able to get a certain amount through individual giving or through, you've got a regular grant process that means that you should be able to get £10,000 a year in this particular restricted area. You plan with that because it's a known. What you shouldn't be doing is going, oh, well, if only we had £1 million, we could do this. And I say £1 million because it always ends up being the figure that people want. I used to work in NHS charity, and my boss there was constantly going to the fundraising manager, right, where's my £1 million check? And you're just there going, that's not how we operate. We operate on a basis of, a lot of small rolling individual donations from people who have been in the hospital and then want to give something back to the staff. That's what we're operating on. And that additionally, we had over £1 million sitting in reserves because we hadn't been spending it because we'd been focused on getting in some more money. That's bad financial planning. Another, again, the £1 million thing, a client that I had was going, they were hitting financial difficulties and they were going, well, we just need to convince someone to give us £1 million and then we're sorted. And then you looked at their books over the last couple of years and someone had given them, not in one go, but over a period of like 3 years, a particular grant funder had given them over £1 million and they'd frittered it away because they'd been waiting for the big money rather than for the, and that grant funder was not happy with them and was stopping giving them money because they were like, well, you've just frittered it. Know what you have and use it and plan with it. Think about what you can get, know what you're spending. Don't get lost in these sorts of, oh, well, what happens if I get this type thoughts? And don't, both because you might not get that money, and secondly, because, you exist to spend the resources. Charities exist to spend money. So you have to, you have to spend that money in order to do your to do the good you're supposed to be doing. And then a little note there, it's not, budgeting isn't rocket science. I know accountants, we like to do all sorts of clever spreadsheets and Excel files and all sorts of other things. And, sometimes tracking the budget takes a little bit of, tracking your spend against budget takes a bit of, especially if you're complicated, especially if you've got multiple funds, it does take a little bit of trickery and hard work. But ultimately, it is similar to household or personal budgeting. You have an amount of money and you're spending it down, and you should know how much what you're coming in. If you can do that, even on a theoretical level, because despite being an accountant for a living, my personal budgeting is shocking. But at least theoretically, I know how to do it. and therefore I can do it for a living. If you've got those skills, you can bring them to the table. You can do what you're doing in that way. You don't have to be an Excel whiz. You don't have to be how do I say it? You don't have to be using your accounting software to its absolute maximum. You just have to be, despite being, again, this is going to talk about, despite being the most, like professionally, I can go into accounting systems guts and understand how its tables work and all of that sort of thing. Where I'm treasurer for a charity called Buy Pride UK, which is, we're tiny. We're not even at the level of having to have independent examinations tiny. I do the budgeting for that on a single spreadsheet where every month, I've got a 12 by, I've got our expenditure lines and 12 columns. And my forecast is what we're expecting to spend in those columns. And every month I just put in my actuals and I see how we're doing. And then I look at the bottom line and I look at whether we've got enough money in the bank to do what we want to do. And if we don't, I go and tell the people who are raising money to get more money. Like, you can do that sort of thing. However it works for you, it doesn't have to be whizzy, it just has to be there. How do we plan for the future then? Reserves are important part of future planning. So this is where I'm talking about, how do we manage that fact that we might have cash flow issues? We might know that we're getting money in at some point, but we need to spend it beforehand. This is how we can use things like our reserve balances as a cushion. Some people get into this space of thinking, you have to keep the reserves in a separate space and you just never touch them, and you just keep building them. And again, that turns you into a money accretion organization rather than a money spending organization. And I firmly believe that charities are about spending money. You exist to spend money on good causes. You don't exist to gain money or to hoard money. So reserves are a form of, if you spent any time in commercial finance or in commercial organizations, you might understand what I'm talking about, equity finance. Commercial organizations are able to go into debt in order to fund their work, in order to get more money, to get themselves out of debt. Charities aren't really allowed to do that, and for very good reasons. So we use our reserves as that kind of cushion almost. Your reserves should be like this level, and then you can go, oh, we're spending, oh, but that's okay because we're coming back up again. You can do that as long as you know what's coming in, what you're spending on, and you know that by tracking it. If you don't know what you're spending, if you're not putting your things into your accounting system, if you're not coding things correctly, you can't then do that flexible planning. That's where you're stuck with this sort of, well, I just have to spend what's in front of me. I can't use my reserves flexibly. I can't, I can't make on the fly decisions around, whether I should be doing a deficit budget this year or whether I should be doing whether we need to surplus budget for this year so that we can build reserves for the project that we're doing in 2 years' time. So yeah, within all of that, so that knowledge is, knowledge is queen if you play chess. Knowledge is the thing that allows you to control the board. Cash is still king, because if you don't have the cash, you lose the game. You can't play anymore. So it's about making sure that you've got that sort of flexible understanding but making sure that you know what you're doing, making sure that you're always looking forward whilst being aware of your current game state. And again, I talk a lot about games. Before I was, not before I was an accountant, but at various times I've been a games blogger and I've done all this sort of thing. So there's a lot of my metaphors and a lot of my understanding I like to bring in from games, and you'll see this in the next couple of slides. But I think chess is at least one that most people have at least some vague understanding of what's going on with it. You can't, when you're playing chess, you can sometimes go, well, if I did this, this, and this, I win the game. But if you're not looking properly and your opponent has access to a checkmate, no matter how good your next move would have been, you're reacting to that, you're reacting to the situation, you're constantly reacting. So you have to be aware of your threats as well as your opportunities, all of that kind of thing. But it's probably getting a little bit labored, and I've only got about 5 more minutes before I'm going to open up to questions. So when we're thinking about, so the final thing that I kind of really want to talk about in terms of how you understand charities and how you, what we need to be thinking about when we're sort of doing our financial planning and our financial strategy is fund management. Because as we all know, charity fund accounting is the worst. It's also the best. I mean, it keeps me in, keeps my rent paid, basically. But it is, again, I was having this conversation yesterday with someone who's saying, like, all the non-charity accountants hate charities because of fund management and restricted fund accounting. So with that in mind, if you're finding it hard, it's because it's hard. Like, if you're worried about it, if you can't quite get your head around it, that's because it's hard. It's not because you don't understand it or because you should be better at this. And I think, again, it's the thing of recognizing, if you recognize that something is difficult, then we can put ourselves into that mode that I was talking about, that, especially most small charity people have, of, right, this is something that I can learn. This is something that I can sort out, that I can seek out answers to. Whereas if you think of something as being something that you just can't do, which a lot of people find with maths and accounting and in finance is often maths, because we're sort of told when we're children that if we can't do maths, it's because we can't do maths. But there are different ways of understanding, different, like, just because we can't do, like, I am terrible at mental arithmetic. If you give me two numbers and ask me to add them together, I dither and I panic and I don't know what I'm doing. I still do this for a living and I've got an A level in maths. You've got to find your way of working with it. And point is, you can find that way and it will be there. So funds, and this is one of the reasons why I like to talk about gaming, because I've been playing these sorts of games, I've been playing video games and tabletop games and board games for my entire life, pretty much. So for me, that's how I understand it. And it's not going to be the same for everyone. There's going to be something else that you have that is your route in. But so a lot of games are around, there's a sort of a subsection of games that are kind of resource management games. And what you've got is multiple, often multiple different things that you have to plan and keep running at the same sort of time. And for me, being able to I'm able to think about all of those different funds and how I'm managing the balances and the levels in the same way that I would think about playing a game that is a resource management game. And specifically, sometimes with resource management games, keeping the doors open, keeping the lights on, keeping the game ticking over, you're still working, you're still doing the work, you're still, you're still actually running, doing what you need to do. And a lot of charities, and again, I suppose this is a little bit of a practical thing, with fund management, with understanding what you're doing, a lot of charities have periods of growth where you're getting a load of money and you're spending it, but you also have periods of stability and contraction where you do just have to keep it running, and you can use those restricted funds, if done correctly, to keep the lights on, to keep it going. You just have to make sure that you are, and again, this is that sort of forward planning thing. So you make sure that you have a plan for how that's going to work. So you've talked to your funders, you've said, you've agreed with them that there is an overhead absorption rate in that grant, rather than coming to them at the end of it and going, well, we spent 90% of the grant on on the work, but now we are about to go bust because of this thing. Can we spend this last 10% on keeping the lights on? And they go, no, we want it back. Like, you don't want to get into that position, and the way you avoid that position is, again, by understanding what your future costs are going to be, making sure you don't overcommit, making sure that if you're in a period when you need to be having stability, you're budgeting around that and having those conversations early. Yeah, it wouldn't be me if I didn't talk about games at some point. This is my final slide. I've been playing this game called Cultist Simulator for the last couple of weeks. It's really weirdly the closest I've ever come to something that is about, despite being about running a Lovecraftian cult, it is the closest I've ever found a game to running a small charity. You are constantly being beset by things like dread, overwhelm you. And that feels very opposite for small charity, because you have to fight that sense of not doing things. But you can also lose the game if you get too lost in, they call it fascination, but too lost in the sort of minutiae rather than in actually, or rather lost in the cause rather than actually running your organization, which is, you think, well, I should be able to go and do everything to do with, you want to get lost in your cause as a charity person. But unfortunately, sometimes you do have to step back and be the CFO. You can't always do the blue sky thinking. Sometimes you have to do it. Yeah, it's a little bit of a funny thing. If you're into weird card games and don't want to have any free time, pick up that game. We're at the end. I'm on time, pretty much, with what I wanted to be. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We've got, another 10, 15 minutes. If anyone has any questions that they want to ask or any reflections on what I've been talking about, please do put your hands up. Is it Naomi or Numi?
Noemi.
Noemi.
Hi, cool. Everyone. Thank you. That was a really good presentation. So thank you very much. For context, I've worked in small charities for the past 12, 15 years. I was working on Sage every job I've had until the job I started 2 months ago, and we're using Xero. Can you convince me that Xero is good? Because I've heard about Xero for 10 years, and I've got friends working at KPMG, so not in the sector. I've got friends in the sector, and everybody was like, Xero is amazing. Full openness, I hate Xero. I find it very hard to use. I miss Sage dearly. From a budget point of view, Xero is a lot cheaper, but I'm still not convinced. And so I'm questioning, is it me and my way of using Xero? And have you got experience of both? And can you sell Xero to me, or I don't know?
I can't sell zero to you because I hate it as well.
Oh, thank you.
I have a lot of issues with zero, not least that they recently just changed a bunch of reports with very little hoo-ha. And it's like, you can't use those reports anymore. You have to use the other reporting that doesn't work as well. And all of your Excel stuff that's based on that doesn't work. Yeah, zero is very powerful for small commercial entities. It can do those really, really well, especially if you are the kind of commercial entity where you are running your organization, but you have an accountant who comes in every now and then to help you with your year-end accounts. It's really bad I find it really bad for charities for a number of different reasons. Fund accounting is abysmal. It just can't do it. It requires workarounds, and it allows all sorts of bad habits to come through. Because it allows you loads of shortcuts. If you don't know what you're doing in advance, and this again comes back to my original question of the sort of planning being really important. You have to plan how you're going to use zero, because if you just use it, so someone's saying, I love zero compared to Sage Online. To be fair, zero is better than Sage Online, but Sage 50 is better than Sage Online, and pretty much everything is better than Sage Online. But zero is still worse than Sage 50, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question, Remy?
It does, and it reflects my experience, so that's great to hear. That is not all me. Still caveat, there might be some me as well, I might need more training. Apart from Zero and Sage, does anyone else use anyone, or do you know of any other database that is good in the charity sector? We have a lot of restricted grants as well.
Liz, who is on this call, loves QuickBooks. I've not used QuickBooks officially for a charity organization yet, or not used it properly. I use it at By Pride, but we don't use it very properly. So I was doing a job where I was an interim, and we had zero forced upon us, so to speak, by the people who'd set the charity up. And I spent about a year doing as this interim, making zero, trying to make it work, and eventually finally managed to put in place my permanent successor. And she came in and went, I'm putting QuickBooks in place, because everything that I need to do, QuickBooks can do better than zero. I've got another couple of questions, so I'm going to leave that at that. There was just one quick in the chat, which was fund accounting. What I mean by fund accounting is that restricted fund balances, tracking restricted fund balances. Okay, I think Laura was next, and then Ed.
Hi, firstly, thank you. Can you hear me okay, by the way? Am I okay? Thank you. That was probably one of the best webinars I've ever been to. I loved it. It was really good. So I have 1,000 questions, so I won't ask them all here. I've just joined a charity, which we've literally just started. We have no finance stuff in place, like at all. We're not at that stage. So I'll probably be emailing you afterwards. My question for now is around the building the core costs or the overhead costs into your project costs. And so at a previous charity I worked for, we used to just add 10% on as standard. Is that just universal for all charities, or does it depend on the charity, or do you have to kind of calculate what that overhead addition would be, or is there like a standard across charities where everyone's just like, yeah, we just add 10% because that's best practice, if that makes sense?
It does make absolutely perfect sense. So one of the fascinating things about finance and accounting is everyone thinks there's standards, and there are official ways of doing things, and there are practical ways of doing things, but you get 3 or 4 accountants in a room, and we'll all come up with a different treatment for something. So actually, finance is quite subjective, and that comes down to things like so what you're talking about there, that 10%, we technically, in technical terms, we call that the overhead absorption rate. And how you calculate your overhead absorption rate, there are all sorts of different ways of doing it. And so, not to go too far, because I do want to get to Ed's question, not to go too far into the weeds on it. This kind of technique that was, as with most accounting techniques, was basically created in the Victorian era around kind of manufacturing and, and this kind of piecework that you would get with like a factory would make a certain amount of things, and then you would you'd have your raw costs for that particular, running that particular, making that particular thing. And then you'd have all the stuff that you couldn't spend, that you had to spend just to be able to start the production line. So your variable costs are the things that every time you make, an item, you would do that. And so your project costs within charitable accounting are often considered to be your variable costs. And then you've got your overheads, and that's everything you have to have beforehand. And in traditional kind of commercial accounting, there are all sorts of different ways of attributing and absorbing those costs. In that kind of accounting, you want to make a profit. So you're usually trying to absorb the amount and then give yourself an amount to sell it at that comes at above that. But you're ultimately aiming to cover the entirety of your overhead costs within what becomes the selling cost of the item, the cost of sale, because you've got no other way of making that money. When you're a manufacturer, you can't go to someone and say, please, can you give us some money to cover our core costs? So charity's sort of broken that mold, and we kind of can go to people and ask for core costs. So what you end up doing is some charities who really want to push down that kind of core cost, or they're really aiming for that, we spend every pound that you give us goes on to frontline services. They often try and push that really low, and then find other ways of raising core costs. Other charities will look at how they can cover the entirety. So some charities will go, actually, what is our entire overhead cost? And we will just now portion that equally between all of our projects. And both are valid ways of doing things. So it really is kind of about how, it's a terrible answer, because the answer is there are all sorts of ways of doing it. So what I would be saying to look at is, does your 10%, once you balance it, once you come to the end of your year, how close is that 10% overhead absorption to your actual overhead costs? Are you covering them? Are you having to then find other costs, other ways of covering them? Or are you over covering them, because actually, you're ending up with, with like increasing your reserves? And what you want to be looking for is a way of getting that cost, that overhead absorption, to be as close as possible to your actual overheads, but with the least amount of faff. So if it turns out that 10% across the board just works, and it's really easy to administer, because at the end of the year, you just go, right, this costs 10%, go for it. I hope that's enough. I want Ed to actually ask a question before we finish up.
I'll be super quick. So reserves policies. I really loved what you were talking about when you were talking about how we use reserves differently. I'm a first-time chief exec. I've been in post for like 4 months, so I'm a complete novice. I do not know how to do this. I've inherited a reserves policy that just says we'll keep X amount in reserves, which is equivalent to X amount of delivery costs. Now that doesn't make any sense to me, because our delivery costs are going to go up, and then our reserves would need to go up, and then if I decided to trail down because things were tight, then our amount of reserves would need to go down. So putting a figure on it doesn't seem to make any sense. And all of the brilliant things that you were talking about being able to invest it in order to be able to grow our ability to do work. I tried to write a policy that covered that stuff, and it made my head want to explode. Does such a policy exist? Or
Yes.
what should it have in it?
And no. The reason the policy you've got is pretty much the standard for a lot of charities, because trying to write it more with an actual flex against what you're doing does make your head explode. And sometimes you just need to go, right, let's just keep this, but you need to use it as a guideline. A lot of charities use it as a sort of almost an envelope, so they'll say a top and a bottom amount. Where that kind of, percentage of delivery cost is coming from, a lot of reserve policies are based around the idea of, if we had a catastrophic funding crisis and we had no money coming in, how long do we want to keep running for? And some charities look at it on the basis of, well, if we have a catastrophic funding crisis and we've got no money coming in, that basically means we're over. Therefore, what we want to do is safely wind down all of our projects. So say you're doing something that has, I've worked with an organization where one of the projects was counseling, and offering counseling, 6 weeks of counseling, free counseling so we made sure that reserves included enough that anyone who was currently in counseling wouldn't be left in the lurch. So we could pay those, even if we had nothing, if we were operating on a skeleton crew, even if we had to pay them in advance, we could give those counsellors the money for that, to finish off those particular things. And that, we considered that as being a safe wind down for that particular project. And so you build that reserve policy out of those kind of pieces. So another thing, like a drop in, you're like, honestly, we can close that tomorrow. Like, it wouldn't be good for everyone, but this is worst case scenario planning. So that has zero need for a reserve policy. That's when you're looking at that kind of catastrophic funding crisis type thing. Other people go, right, well, actually, we're looking at how can we just keep ourselves going? We know that we might have a funding model that has ups and downs. We just need to make sure that we've got enough money in the bank to operate for 3 months. Like, that's often a thing, people look at 3 months or 6 months. So that might be where you're kind of coming from. And that's nice and easy, and trustees like it, and everyone likes it because you don't have to think about it. Where it comes a problem, and we saw this over COVID, is a lot of the charities that, if ever there was a time when your reserves should have been used for, like, how do we work out what we're going to do because we're hitting a crisis, that was COVID. Shutdowns and, a lot of in-person charities having to kind of move people into different ways of meeting, different ways of doing things. The charities that did really well are the ones that went, right, okay, this is what we were waiting for, guys. We've got the money, let's do it. Let's make sure that, and the charities which did badly were the ones that said, we can't spend this reserves because it's our reserve policy and we can't go below it. I don't know if that helps, because I could talk about reserves for literally hours. But I think the point is, if it's okay for now, go with it. But there are some things that you can really work on to, I think I did a thing for Liz, didn't I, about reserves? I think there is go to Embrace Finance. There is a whole bunch of really good done by, I think, people who aren't me, but also one that's done by me, which was literally about reserves and how to think about. It's a 1-page guide of how to think about them and what to. And she's got a bunch of really good resources for small charities on how to think about some of these questions. Thank you, everyone. Is that enough, Ed, or do you need more? Okay. Thank you everyone for coming along. We are a little bit over time, but so feel free to disappear. If anyone does have any other questions, I do have 10 more minutes. So, but otherwise, feel free to go and get on with the rest of your days. Thank you again for spending a morning talking about finance.